when this man, I think I introduce him the same way every single time, but why not? Just certainly if it's a new audience. When this guy, still at the end of his playing career, got out on the field for us at the NFL Network in our coverage of the Combine, everybody knew, okay, he has a career in broadcasting if he so chooses. And then, none of us, though, saw the opportunity that he'd be the number one voice in a booth calling a Super Bowl. But he showed he can do this. He is doing it. He's awesome at it. He's an Emmy Award winner. He's Greg Olsen of Fox Sports. How are you, Greg?
Doing great, Rich. Appreciate it, man. How you doing?
True story, man.
Hanging in out there?
We're
good. The description of the weather. That sounds pretty nasty.
We're good. I can give you the traffic, but that's only on the 8s, and we're on the 3s right now. So
fair enough. I'll check back in.
What is the biggest story entering the season in your mind, Greg? What is it?
Wow, I think right now, to me, globally in the NFL, I think the most interesting story is, and obviously we're biased to it at Fox because we get so many NFC games, is, how is that young stable of NFC quarterbacks going to keep pace with the young stable of AFC quarterbacks, right? I think, right now you got Jalen Hurts, the MVP runner-up last year, kind of burst onto the scene, taking Philly, a couple plays away from the Super Bowl, from a Super Bowl, trophy. And then, you still have Dak, and then the NFC gets kind of wild, right? For so long, we were used to, Aaron Rodgers. And then, for the last couple of years, we had Brady enter it, down to Tampa, but now he's gone. So it seems like there's a little bit of a changing of the guard, and it seems like the AFC, everywhere you look, is just talented young quarterbacks across the board, whether it's on the perennial, contenders like Kansas City, of course, or Buffalo or Cincinnati, but even on teams that, are kind of that people think are about to break out, like the Chargers with Herbert and, what they're doing down in Miami, and, can Tua stay healthy and continue to improve under that Mike McDaniels offense. So I think that the jury is out on the NFC. Like, can they get a handful? Can they get a nice young development group of young quarterbacks to keep pace, with the AFC? And I think right now, probably only a couple teams can sit here today and say, all right, we got our guy, Philly and whatnot. But, I think there's a lot of teams right now still trying to say, okay, we think we've got a guy. San Francisco thinks they have a guy. Panthers think they have a guy. Let's see how things play out. To me, big picture, quarterbacks drive this league, and I think the NFC specifically needs some of these young guys to kind of break out.
Right, and even the draft didn't help, Greg, right? Because you mentioned Bryce Young. He was the first one taken, but then goes Stroud to the AFC, then Anthony Richardson to the AFC, even Will Levis when he finally went to the AFC as well to Tennessee. So that leaves, guys who have made the Super Bowl for the Rams in Stafford and Goff, maybe trying to enter the fray in the NFC. You also have two young'uns in the fact that you've got Jordan Love and you've got Justin Fields. And then there's one that I want to linger on a little bit here because they made the playoffs last year with the comeback player of the year, Geno Smith. And I think the Seahawks got even better. Not just Bobby Wagner, but two young kids in the draft, and Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zach Charbonnet. You also have that kid Witherspoon on the back end, Jamal Adams getting healthy, the two tackles last year in their second year. How good do you think the Seahawks can be, Greg?
Yeah, I give them a lot of credit. That roster, their last couple drafts, you just named a bunch of them. Obviously everyone, was holding their breath when they traded Russ. I got to see Geno that year I was out there, and granted he was in a backup role, but he had a really strong presence about him in the locker room. Guys still gravitated towards him. Obviously Russ was the man and he was the starter, but Geno was not your typical backup where he just kind of hung in the back and tried to stay out of the way. He would be out in practice, and, the first time you watch the ball come out of his hand, you're like, wow, like that guy is talented. You can tell why he had the success he did in college and then for a while there with the Jets. So I'm happy for Geno to get his shot and do as well as he did last year back for the first time in that full, kind of full-time capacity. But as you mentioned, they're young, they're talented, and they've really turned that roster over quite a bit in the last couple of years. So to their credit, I think they've got a lot of good players. I think they got a lot of young pieces. I think they probably surprised some people last year with how well they did. I think their division is not as strong as everyone, going into last year, everyone thought that NFC West was going to be world beaters. The Rams obviously took their lumps. The Cardinals are kind of in a little bit of a rebuild. So with, San Francisco arguably has the best roster in the league. We'll see what happens at quarterback with Purdy and Lance and all that, staying healthy. But, that division is not what that division looked like even a couple of years ago. So I think you're spot on. I think the Seahawks are in a good spot. Talent-wise, obviously Pete Carroll's done it for a long time and knows how to kind of reinvent themselves on a every few year kind of cycle. And then I also think they're going to benefit from that NFC West maybe not being, aside from San Francisco, maybe not being the gauntlet that it was, only a year or two ago when the Rams were amongst the best teams in the league.
Is Rams at Seahawks your week one game, or your Packers Bears? Where are you going to be week one? What's your week one game?
Yeah, we're Packers. We're Packers Bears.
Okay, man.
Obviously, Rodgers being out of there, one of the main storylines kind of goes with him to New York. But looking at that matchup, you mentioned the two when you were kind of going through the young, kind of the young guys in the NFC with Justin Fields, and now Jordan Love finally getting his chance to kind of step out from behind Aaron Rodgers' shadow. So I think there's going to be a lot of intrigue. It's in Chicago, which is awesome because it's one of the best cities in the world. So to go there to call a game is amazing. And then I think to see two young quarterbacks that their franchises have pretty much hitched their wagons to their backs and said, hey, we're going to go as far as you take us. I think it's going to be an interesting matchup. I'm curious to see how the rest of the talent around Justin, I think them getting DJ Moore is critical. Last year, I think a big issue in Chicago was, Justin was out there and he was doing a lot with his legs and a lot as a designed runner, and he was super effective. They needed some better talent. They needed to protect him. They needed some more dynamic playmakers. So when they made the trade with Carolina, obviously, Carolina didn't want to send DJ, but that was the only way that Chicago was going to do it. So right. I think DJ is going to go a long way. I think Chase Claypool. So I think he'll have better weapons this year out there in Chicago.
Greg Olsen of Fox Sports right here on the Rich Eisen Show. All right, what's your opinion of Dak? He's getting really slagged all over the place right now, to be quite frank. What do you got for me on that? What do you got?
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think it's fair. I've always been a big fan of Dak. I like him. I like him personally. Every time I meet with him for production meetings and whatnot, I come away really just impressed with his demeanor and his approach and his mentality. I think, frankly, what the knock on him, and I think if you ask Dak, he'd probably understand it, is twofold. You're playing quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. I think expectations and spotlight doesn't get any bigger in sports than that position on that franchise. And then secondly, and I think this is the part that is justified, it seems like in those playoff moments, things just kind of fall short. And I think he knows it. I think he's aware of it. I don't think necessarily all those playoff losses fall on his shoulders. There's obviously throws and decisions and whatnot he'd love to do over. But I think he has played more than top-tier level football. They've been a top, call it 5 offense for the last couple of years. I think transitioning to Mike McCarthy now calling the plays, I think it's going to be a fascinating storyline. It's one that I know we're going to be following. We'll call a million Dallas games this year, which always makes it fun. But, Kellen Moore, he wanted to throw it. He was going to put the ball in Dak's hand as much as he could. And when you throw it 40-plus times a game, you're going to have a couple turnovers. You're going to have a couple picks. I don't necessarily think that's going to be their kind of their process this year. I think they're going to be more of a run. They're going to be a little bit more balanced, a little bit more conservative. And we'll see whether or not that's a recipe for their offense to be successful, because they've been a great regular season team, and now the expectations and the next step for out in Dallas is, all right, we got to stop just being one of the top teams in the regular season and then getting to the playoffs and falling flat.
Well, I get the idea of going a little bit more conservative when you got Micah Parsons up front and Diggs in the back, and the defense as stout as it is, right? I get it. So you're going to go conservative and run the ball more and let Zeke walk? Like, is that the time? With Pollard coming off of an injury? And I don't quite compute it. I mean, you had Brandon Cooks, too, to take the top of the defense off. CeeDee Lamb's getting set to, join a top tier of wide receiver. So that's a big mystery, as you point out. Great storyline. I don't know what it's going to look like. I really don't, Greg.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. I think listen, Mike McCarthy's been doing this at a high level obviously a Super Bowl champ in Green Bay. He's been coaching. He's been a head coach in the league a long time, been a play caller in the league a long time. He's got a lot of experience. Obviously, he's very comfortable and confident in his plan. So I understand. You know, the one thing, though, I felt when you mentioned the two guys on defense, right, Parsons and Diggs, and, you know, you said, all right, we're so good on defense. I think what made Dallas so unique on defense is when your offense is such a, you know, high-powered scoring offense, right, averaging, call it 30 a game for, you know, a pretty good amount of time, which is, you know, it's hard to do in the NFL. When you're a 30-point offense and that other team comes out, they have no choice but to try to chase that scoreboard to 30, right? If you come down now and just sit on the ball and run it on first and second down, and maybe now it becomes a race to 21, if I'm playing you, I don't have to be as aggressive. I don't have to air it out as much. All of a sudden now if I can ground and pound to match your ground and pound, I pretty much eliminated Diggs and Micah Parsons from being as impactful in the game. See, if I'm Dallas, I want to get a lead early.
Right.
I want to make this a track meet and say, okay, match me score for score. Go ahead and drop back 35 times to try to meet me because I got one of the best pass rushers and one of the best defensive backs. That style of game fits that Dallas mold based on their personnel, based on Dan Quinn. So I actually thought that more aggressive offensive style, albeit led to some turnovers, the more points Dallas would chase would put the opposing team offense on the aggression. I think that's why Micah Parsons was a game wrecker, because if he knows you're dropping back trying to chase a lead, he's teeing off on you. I just think that recipe for them worked. The problem is it didn't end up getting them over the hump, and that's why they're going to re-explore it.
So then give me the team, Greg Olsen, that prevents you and Burkhardt from being back in either Philadelphia or San Francisco to call the NFC Championship game between those two. Which is the team that breaks that up?
Wow, that's a good question, because I think if you were going to ask me what's my NFC pick, I think I would go if I got the you know, the caveat that Brock Purdy is 100% and there's no pitch count, there's no he's going to miss Wednesday practice. Like, without knowing the backstory of how all that is, if we just operated from the assumption that he is as good as ever, elbow's a non-factor, he's entering the season no different than if he never had the injury, I think San Francisco is the most talented group in the NFC. Maybe they have the best roster in football. I think when you look both sides of the ball, skill-wise, both fronts, offense and defense, and then obviously they got a million players in the back end in the secondary at linebacker with Fred Warner and those guys. So I think San Francisco's the most talented. I think if Brock Purdy doesn't get hurt, I think that NFC Championship game, goes without saying, is a much different animal. I think San Francisco comes out this year, and if they can avoid the injury bug, which has kind of been their Achilles heel in the regular season these last few years, if they can avoid that, which, again, is kind of a fingers crossed kind of thing, I think they're the best NFC team, at least on paper.
Well, again, this is exactly why I thought you'd be perfect in media and why you won an Emmy Award. You just gave me a very thoughtful answer without actually answering my question. So give me the team that will prevent Philly and San Francisco from playing one another in the NFC. In your estimation, Greg Olsen, what do you got for me? Come on now.
I think if you put a gun to my head.
Well, figuratively, yes.
I think the team you said in the beginning, I think has a shot. I don't know if I'd bet on it. I don't know if I would. But if you told me I couldn't pick San Francisco or Philly, I think Seattle's probably right there.
There it is.
I think Seattle's there. I don't know if Detroit. I want to say Detroit. I think they're an exciting team. I think they're a team a lot of people have high expectations. I love Dan Campbell. We're going to learn a lot about them opening night against Kansas City. I think they're close. I'm not quite sure if they're good enough on defense yet to really put in that long stretch and be there towards the end, but I think they're going to have an exciting regular season because I think their offensive scheme and I think Goff plays really well in that system. So I think if you made me and said, all right, you got to take Philly and San Francisco out, I think Seattle division-wise, talent-wise, quarterback, I think Seattle would probably be right there at that next tier.
Greg Olsen of Fox Sports here on the Rich Eisen Show. Couple more minutes left with him. So let's switch to the AFC. And since you said let's just assume Purdy's back and he's not injured, didn't have any surgery, and he just turns out to be as good as he was last year. Let's assume that for Burrow, right? Let's assume that whatever scared the hell out of everybody in training camp, he's going to be fine, even if it's not week one. You know, they could go a couple weeks without him and then go on their run and be Joe Burrow leading the Bengals. So give me the team in the AFC that will prevent another Bengals-Chiefs rematch in the AFC Championship game. I'll switch it for you, Greg. What do you got?
I think it's got to be Buffalo, right? I think Buffalo is at the point now where they've established that winning tradition. McD has been there. McDermott's been there a long time now. They've got security. They've got their quarterback. They've got young talent. They've got veterans. They've molded that thing pretty much how they envisioned it, and they've had as much success as anybody in the league, with the exception of getting over that hump and making it to the Super Bowl and getting past the AFC Championship game. So I think they've got to be this has to be their year, right? And I think they've been the team that everyone's been thinking can break out. And when you have Josh Allen at quarterback and you have Stephon Diggs and these guys, I mean they're as talented a group, they're as consistent of a group. I think the thing that's held Buffalo from being that top tier and maybe holding a Super Bowl is they just happen to be in the same division as two other, call it generational talents. And how often does one conference? I mean, we saw it for a while with Peyton Manning and Brady and Phillip Rivers, and there's only one of those guys every year out of one conference can go to the Super Bowl. And now, the same things kind of happened in the AFC. And the last couple of years, Burrow and Mahomes have gotten the better out of that conference. And now the question is it Buffalo's time? Is it Josh Allen's time to say, okay, we've kind of played third fiddle in the playoffs, maybe not in the regular season, but in the playoffs we have. Is it our time now to make that jump? And I think they have all the pieces. I think Josh Allen's arguably one of the top 2 or 3 overall players in the whole league. I think McDermott's one of the best coaches in the league. So I think it's Buffalo is right there, and it's that three-headed monster until somebody else proves that they can kind of put themselves in that ranking.
Yeah, but I don't know if you've heard, a first ballot Hall of Famer just parachuted his way into that division, Greg Olsen. So what do you think holds the Jets back from maybe taking that division with a very talented roster and Aaron Rodgers, who I'm sure when you saw him last year did not appear to be the same guy you're seeing on Hard Knocks right now, if you don't mind me supposing.
No, and I had a chance to visit with Aaron the other night. They were here in Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
They practiced down at training camp against the Panthers.
Yep.
And then, they came up and played a preseason game. So I went and visited. I know a couple of their front office people and went and saw them at the hotel and had a chance to visit with Aaron for a while. Yeah, he just has a new life to him. He couldn't be more excited. I think the youth of that team kind of has invigorated him a little bit. I think he feels the energy of Sauce Gardner and these young guys, Wilson, and he's around all these young guys that are kind of breathing in this fresh life to him. And it's never been a matter of whether Aaron could play. And obviously we saw him almost single-handedly carry the Packers and almost squeak into the playoffs last year when they were kind of thrown to the wolves halfway through the season as they were kind of left out of that picture. And then he kind of almost got him in there. I think Aaron's going to come out with something to prove. I think on paper their roster is very talented. We got to see how that offensive line develops a little bit. I think that could be a little bit of a question mark. There's some musical chairs up front. Listen, when you have Aaron Rodgers on your team, you have a shot in every single game in every single division. It doesn't matter. Can he have the Tom Brady effect when he went to Tampa and joined with all that talent they had? I wouldn't put it by him. It's a little bit of younger talent. It's a little bit of rawer talent. But still, if those young guys can develop and just get to a certain threshold, Rodgers is more than good enough to take them over the top. So I think they've got, obviously, if you ask them, I think they've got to show it. They've got to prove it. If you're asking me would I be shocked if they won the division, absolutely not, because when you have Aaron Rodgers, when you have a quarterback at that level, like all those other teams we talked about, you're in the picture every single game until the season is completely over for you. You have a shot. So
a different cat than the one that you would see in production meetings in the middle of last season, right? Rodgers, different guy?
I just feel like he's so – and I never got the notion that Aaron was checked out. When we talked to him in production meetings, he was as competitive as ever. It ripped him. It killed him that they were losing. It killed him that they were kind of getting kicked around a little bit in the media. Like he's a prideful guy. He's a guy that has high expectations of himself, of his team, of everyone around him, and he's not used to losing. And he hadn't lost a lot in the last couple of years. Him and LaFleur up there in Green Bay before last year. So I think any competitor, anybody who's used to having the personal and team success that he's used to having for 20 years, has a high level of expectations, and they obviously fell short of that. So I think now fresh team, fresh circumstances, kind of a breath of fresh air, big city, big spotlight. I think he's relishing in it, and I think he's going to come out this year ready to rip and ready to put the league on notice that he's not quite done yet.
Greg, you're the best, man. Thanks for the time. Would love to have you on as much as you're up for it. Safe travels, certainly for week 1 to Chicago, and best to your fam.
You got it. It was always fun to chat with you, Rich.
Right back at you. Love talking ball with Greg Olsen at Greg Olsen 88 on Twitter. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.